a young perspective on hot-button issues around the world. This is The Hub.
Hello and welcome to The Hub on CGTN. I'm Huang Jiyuan in Beijing. As 2025 draws to a close, the global order is under strain. Uncertainties abound, and nations are navigating a complex and shifting landscape. Amid these challenges, China is preparing to launch its 15th five-year plan in 2026. On the global stage, China's Global Governance Initiative is reaching out amid growing expectations for a more just and balanced international order. To discuss China's evolving role on both the domestic and global fronts, we speak with Martin Jacques, former senior fellow at Cambridge University. Mr. Jacques, China just proposed its recommendations for the 15th five-year plan. What do you look for most out of it?
Well, I think the sort of basic emphasis, the line of travel, how the economy will change in response to it, what the growth rate is anticipated to be is always a question. So it's obviously a very important moment in Chinese life as well, because people can reflect on what it means and what the future is going to look like and so on.
China's development is very much divided into these five-year plans. What do you see as the strength of it?
Well, I think the strength of it is that it provides a view of the future, of where the economy is going and what can be anticipated over the 5 years. And that gives a direction to the society as a whole about where China's going to go and where it can get to in that period. And I think that's very important. You know, in the Western economies, say in the UK, we have one major statement, which is the budget statement. So it's a very different way of doing things. It's actually absolutely typical of the difference between China as a socialist economy and Britain and such countries as capitalist economies.
Since you mentioned UK, I want to talk a little bit about the China-Europe relations, because it's in the headlines these days, whether it's about the chips incident or it's just the whole relationship in the context of the greater China-U.S. problem. How would you evaluate the position of China-Europe relationship right now? Is it good, is it okay, or is it bad?
Well, I don't think it's good. I think it's difficult, and I can't quite see my way to thinking it's going to be significantly better.
Why?
Well, firstly, Europe is so tied to America that, as we saw earlier this year, Europe couldn't really bring itself to take an independent position on tariff. It had 2 months, and it said it was going to come out with an alternative to whatever Trump proposed, but it didn't. There was nothing. So therefore they were basically at the whim of Trump in that situation. And I think that spoke of a confusion, a division in Europe about how to deal with the Trump situation. That's one thing. The second thing is that the implication of what's happening is that the old relationship between the United States and Europe is broken in some profound way. Trump's attitude towards allies, and Europe was fundamental to NATO, and Trump doesn't really like NATO very much. It leaves it with needing to formulate its own positions on things independent of the United States. But Europe's not capable of doing that. I don't think Europe can do that, because Europe doesn't have the political or intellectual capacity to do that. Why? Because ever since 1945, Europe's been with America in the Western Alliance. All major foreign policy decisions have been taken in Washington, D.C. They're not taken in Brussels. They're not taken in Paris or Berlin. They're taken in the U.S. So for Europe now to think of its own interests independently of the United States, I don't think it's going to happen. Once upon a time, of course, it would. I mean, the European powers were the powers for a long time in the world, basically until
Second World War?
Yeah, until the Second World War, exactly. And now the situation is very different. So I'm very worried, actually, about Europe and about its ability to get its act together. And the backdrop to it is the very poor performance of the European economy. Its economic growth rate compares very unfavorably with that of the United States, let alone China or something like that, but just with the United States. European industry is not in a good condition because it's failed really to gain a foothold in, well, above all, big tech. It's got no big tech firms. It's got small, but it hasn't got big tech firms. This is very serious in an era where we know the world is going to be defined more and more by chips and AI and so on.
But now with China and the United States seem to be patching up a little bit of their problems and tensions, is it possible that China-Europe relations could get better under that context?
Well, to the extent that Europe still is taking its lead from the United States, even with Trump, then that could help the relationship with China. It could. In fact, I think it probably will, actually, if thinking about it.
Do you think that the midterm election, after the midterm election, we could have a clearer direction about China-U.S. relations?
It's possible, but I wouldn't bank on it. Does Trump know what he wants out of the relationship with China? I think he knows probably now that he can't get what he wanted, which is he obviously wanted to damage China with these tariffs and so on. And China rumbled Trump basically in April by saying no agreement like this. And then Trump sticks his very tariffs on and China replies in kind. And then an agreement that was supposed to have happened then postponed for 90 days and then another 90 days. And then, you know, we've got some kind of patchwork agreement now. I can't see Trump reconciling himself to China. I don't think it's impossible in this longer run that one might see something completely different, which is that Trump throws in his anti-China card and tries to do a deal with China of a different kind. I think that's not entirely inconceivable, but I don't want to put any money on it.
Why do you think it's so difficult nowadays for politicians in the U.S. to just see the fact that you cannot damage China without damaging yourself? It's 50-50.
Because I think there's a big head of steam worked up in America, which probably started around 2010, after the financial crisis, where that was the period when distrust in China began. Well, distrust was based on the fact that they suddenly realized that China, after the financial crisis, was actually a lot stronger than they realized, and that American dependence on China was a lot more than they realized. From then, you got the build-up of anti-China feeling. Trump could see it, the possibilities, the electoral possibilities. And I think the general umbrella of this was a feeling in American society that there was a threat to America's position as the global hegemon. And, you know, so much of America's identity since the Second World War has been bound up with being number one in the world. That's something which every citizen in some way or other knows the meaning of and recognizes the importance of. So I think that it's very difficult to pull out of this situation. I'm not saying it's impossible, because nothing is impossible. It depends on the circumstances. But I find it difficult. You see, there isn't really, in America, there isn't a strong pro-China lobby saying we need to have this kind of arrangement with China.
Don't you think the business community should be that lobby in the United States? Because a lot of U.S. businesses are very profitable in China, and I mean, vice versa.
Yeah, and of course, you're right. Business was the major pro-China force, lobby in the United States, consistently over a long period, really. Yes, since I suppose 1972, really. Eventually, I mean, it took time to get going. But at the moment, big business doesn't really determine the direction of the United States. The rise of the sort of populist right-wing forces and anti-China and so on has been based on a groundswell of opinion which business hasn't really affected that much.
Right now, people are saying the United States cannot come to terms with its long-term strategic goals. Why is it so difficult for the United States to get itself together?
Well, I think that in one sense, America has got itself together.
How?
Well, Trump's re-election in 24, and he runs the place now. He's basically ruling without Congress. He's got the Supreme Court, very much on his side, if not quite in his pocket. So he's in a very powerful position. So, American politics at the moment is about Trump. Now, there are signs that that is weakening, the recent election in New York and so on. But he's very much in charge. The line of travel, the direction of travel is very much a Trumpian one at the moment. How solid that is, how long that will last, that remains to be seen.
Because I think for the China-U.S. relationship and for the sake of global economy, at least we need some kind of a certain direction where the U.S. is heading. I mean, like I asked about China's 15th five-year plan. China puts out one of these plans every 5 years or so and sets a clear direction. And at the end of that 5 years period, we give a report on how it's being achieved. Right now, I don't know, and we don't know where the United States is going to be 5 years from now. At least a decade ago, we had some vague idea about its general direction. Now we don't know.
Let's go back a step here. I think that the rise of China has destabilized America. It's the rise of China that's led to this situation. Not just because of the anti-China measures, but America has lost a lot of confidence. It's lost its sense of direction. It knows that China is a formidable adversary. At the moment, the big thing is to try and damage China. But even if they do or don't damage China, they sort of know that there's another kid on the block now, and it's as strong as the United States. And if they look at it carefully enough, they'll know actually that China is already, in reality, a stronger force globally than the United States. That is a very difficult situation for American politicians and the American public to come to terms with. It's not a simple one. So, and it's led to so many divisions in American society. America is politically more divided, I think, than at any time since the Second World War.
But here's what I don't get. China is not out there to be anti-America in every situation. Basically, we've been telling the world that we're minding our own businesses. We have our own interests to stand up for, and we're not there to replace you. That's the message from top to the bottom of the society. That's the message. Why is it so difficult for the U.S. to just get that and understand it?
Because it doesn't think it's as simple as that.
Okay. How complex is it?
When China says we're not here to replace you, well, China's become a peer competitor economically of the United States, and it's going to is overtaking the United States. So the reality of the global situation is that China is stronger than the United States. It has stronger links globally with other countries and so on. The decline of Britain and the rise of America, the replacement of Britain as the global hegemon by the United States, was ultimately because the American economy was so much stronger than a weakening British economy.
The global south is rising, there's no doubt about it. People are speaking up more, its voices in international institutions is growing. If China needs a title in the global south, what would you give it? Leader or major contributor? What's the title for it?
Well, it's more than major contributor. It is the biggest single contributor. It's the biggest single source of growth. It's the biggest single source of assistance through Belt and Road and so on. I mean, extraordinary. And probably you could say de facto it's the leader because of those things. But it's very important that this is a real test for China actually, is how it manages to exercise that. Because the solidarity of the global south is really important now. Because as it's entering more the mainstream of global politics and global economy, then the stresses and strains and difficulties and so on are going to increase. And so holding this together and charting a course which actually cements those relationships is going to be really important. And not easy. I think that is a new challenge. It's different from everything else we're talking about because it's a different bunch of countries and how they relate to, and as the global south countries get stronger, then they'll have a clear idea, they'll have more strength individually of themselves. So this is going to be very, very interesting, because I think the new global order, which is, you can see now with your binoculars on the horizon, the new global order will be China and the global south.
Do you think China can handle that relationship well?
The signs are so far that China can handle these things very well. To get to where we are today has been a remarkable statecraft on the part of China.
So Chinese President Xi Jinping proposed so far 4 major initiatives: the development, security, civilization, and governance. And what do you think these documents say about how China is going to handle its international relations from this point forward?
I think what they set out are the basic principles on which they think interstate relations should be conducted in the future. And that is important. I think that to do it in such a public fashion, it was very smart. I mean, when the first one came out, was Global Development Initiative, maybe that was predictable because China had such a strong track record and emphasis on development, the Global Civilization Initiative. Now, if you were addressing that to the West, the Western countries would got no idea what you're talking about. They don't think in civilizational terms at all, even about themselves. That there's a very interesting question there to be explored. So, but it was obviously directed at the 80% of the world's population, was taking China out, 70-odd% of the world's population, where civilization does have a real meaning. Whether India, which is, a civilization state in the manner of China, or Turkey, or those kind of countries, maybe Russia thinks of itself like that, but also countries that lost their civilization as a result of colonialism, or are trying to retrieve it, and so on. And that is really important to say that to these countries, to allow them, to give them the space, to give them the encouragement to do that. I think this is going to be really important. I think the way the Global South develops over the next 50 years is going to be probably the most interesting question.
Don't you worry that right now the world is too fragmented? There are too many competing interests or, different views on how the world should be run out there, that expecting those many countries to stick together is going to be really, really difficult or near impossible.
Well, the truth is they're not going to stick together in any idealistic way. We're not living in some kind of fairyland. These conflicts will remain. And the question will be to find ways, creating a new kind of global framework for tackling these kind of issues. Now, obviously, China will be extremely important in this regard because it will be the country it will be the strongest country by a country mile. We shouldn't think we're going from, a terrible conflictual era to heaven. It won't. It's not as simple as that. Humanity doesn't work like that. Conflicts. There are many, many aspects to conflicts around the world that are not easily resolved. But I think that. But I'm being very impressed with the way that China has, for example, tried to reach out to the Middle East, to the Arab countries, to the Gulf states, and so on. Islamic states in general, which make up such an important minority proportion of the world's population. And so it would be interesting to see how China would handle the Middle East, for example. At the moment, it's got no foothold in the Middle East beyond these relations it's begun to develop, which are still at a stage of relative infancy.
So, myself, I'm more of an institutionalist. I believe that if you want to coordinate this kind of a massive group with different interests, you need some kind of institutional support behind it. Now, China is saying that, we all know the United Nations is in some way outdated by now. It's 80 years, it needs fixing. And China is saying we're not giving up on that. We're trying to make changes to it. And under its framework, maybe we can find new ways to bring these people together and find common ground. What do you think, how would you say the chances are that China is going to success? And do you think that the United States is going to stand in the way of that?
Well, I think China's right to stand in support of the United Nations because it is the only genuinely representative institution in the world. You know, whatever it is, 193, 104, 194 nation states are part of the United Nations. The problem with the United Nations is that it's ambiguous. The Security Council is just the five big powers from the end of the Second World War. So going forward, it would need to be really effective. It would need major reform. But how that reform might take place, I don't know. It's very difficult to say. I mean, at some point, the United States, you can't exclude the possibility, would actually undermine the United Nations because it's in New York. I mean, it's always had that possibility that it could start denying visas and so on to other countries. So the United States basically doesn't like the United Nations. So for most of the post-war history, it stood at arm's length from the United Nations, basically because it knew it was ineffective. The only time when the United States really liked the United Nations, I think, was when they managed to fight the Korean War under the banner of the United Nations. But they haven't been able to do that, something like that, so blatant since then. So I think that we have to hold on to what we've got and try and improve it. I think that is the first thing. If we're looking to in a longer term sense, then of course there's going to be a new global architecture with new institutions. There are bound to be lots of new institutions. Just look at China's rise and how many new institutions that's led to. It's extraordinary, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, Belt and Road. I mean, there are so many things that China's given rise to and so on. And I'm sure there'll be a lot more over this period. And one of the difficulties in the global south, it's basically under-organized, it's under-institutionalized. Because one of the, in the rich countries like Europe and the United States, there's a very dense civil society. That's not true in relatively developing societies. That's reflected in regional relations and international bodies and so on. So I think that we have to look at it strategically. This is a long process. It's not going to be resolved with a sudden reform of the United Nations.
As we've all been saying that the Chinese modernization is going to have a great impact on how the world looks. And you said there's going to be a new architecture out there somewhere, but we cannot know. How do you think China's modernization is progress since we've got this new 5-year plan recommendations out there? How do you think that modernization is going to impact this new architecture? Is it going to be multipolar? Is it going to be bipolar? How is it going to be?
Previously, China was seen as a rapidly developing country and so on, with a lot of manufacturing prowess, but it was behind the United States and it wasn't there, it wasn't a tech leader, etc. Now we've entered a new period where China is obviously the most important manufacturing power in the world. It's very, very innovative. It's not just about the speed with which it's developing its chips or AI and so on, but it's able to compete in all of these kind of areas. In other words, what we're witnessing in a dramatically short space of time is the emergence of China as the most advanced economy in the world. Now, what that does is it changes the global equation in the sense that people no longer look up to the United States as the natural global economic leader, because it's not anymore. And you can feel it at this conference, how people are looking at things. And they're not repeating themselves, saying the same things. They're bringing their experience, their way of viewing China from their country and so on. And you can feel the change, the confidence now, I think, that is sort of ringing around the room here, that China, that we're not talking about some distant future, it's happening now. Now that immediately changes the way people think, changes the way countries think, changes the way their kind of expectations. So I think China is giving hope, encouragement to this. Just the very act of China's progress is doing that.
Well, I think everyone's waiting to see how that unfolds. I want to thank you for this opportunity to talk to you and thank our audience for tuning in. I'm Huang Jiyuan. See you next time.
Tales of Chinese Children is a collection of fairy tales and fables written by Edith Eaton, one of the first Asian American women writers from the turn of the 20th century. Edith focused on children who were treasured.
They are the sweetest gift of all.
Lost.
Get away from me! Get away from me!
Or misunderstood.
My son, the evil spirit in your sister had almost lost you to me.
In the complicated adult world and much more. Search for Books and Beyond on radio.cgtn.com and all major podcast platforms to delve into an audio journey which allows the sound to linger around and above you for stunning realism.